Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they got it right, and this is Tom Navolis, your host. And today I am delighted and honored to have on the program none other than Pastor Doug Wilson out of Moscow, Idaho at Christ Church. Doug, how are you today?
Doing great. Yeah, better than I deserve.
Well, that's the grace of God, for sure. Totally understand that. I appreciate the time, and what I want to do is get right to something interesting as we elaborate it, and so that everybody listening to the program understands there's a lot of stuff happening up there in Moscow, Idaho, in particular to your grandsons and your son. And we're going to talk about that here in the first segment. In the second segment, what I want to get to is what people have heard me talk about, the extensibility of the gospel and what that means, not just from some, slushy application of principles, but the real living essence of it. And in my estimation, how that has worked with Christ Church, with God's work at Christ Church. And that is, I think, kind of a background as to what we'll talk about in the first segment here relative to your grandsons and son. And then we're going to kind of close it up if we get time in that third segment, and maybe driving that all back around to some of what I've been talking about here in Northeast Ohio and on the program as well about the lesser magistrates, and if that makes, if we get to that. So let's drive right to it. First off, things have been interesting in Idaho. There's been this StickerGate that's been going on, and that applies to your grandsons and your son. Give us an update on that, and where is it, and how do you see it going?
Sure. I think a number of your listeners probably have seen something about the first piece of this, and that is in Latah County in Moscow, Idaho here, we were touched by the coronavirus very lightly. So it was not anywhere remotely near a crisis, minimal number of cases. It was just, I'm not saying that's the way it was everywhere else in the world, but here it was very minimal. And so our city went into lockdown, masking orders, that sort of thing. Right. And so like a typical fearful response. And then when they extended the masking order, our church held a psalm sing at City Hall in protest of this. It was a religious service. We opened with prayer, sang 3 psalms, closed with the doxology, and we're gone. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, the city's emergency order explicitly carved out exceptions for political speech, religious activity, etc. So what we were doing was not against the law. Now, even if they had not carved that out, I don't think it would have been against the law, but right. Explicitly, in terms of their own emergency order, what we were doing was perfectly legal. The city painted a bunch of dots 6 feet apart on the parking lot and told us when we assembled to do this that we had to stand on the dots to sing. Right.
So you had a permit. Did you have a permit, or was that just because it's...
No, it was just a public space. We just showed up. Yeah. And we were only going to be there for 15 minutes, right? Right. Well, they moved in when I told everybody that the police had told me when I arrived that they were going to enforce the order, and I told everybody that just a full information sort of way. And then we began. And when we began, the cops moved in and they arrested 3 of our people and gave citations to 2 of them. Okay. Now, what they did was they arrested 3 people for doing something that was perfectly legal, even according to the terms of their own ordinance. Mm-hmm. Right? Right. So footage of them being taken away, and that footage went viral. It was picked up by Laura Ingraham and Tucker Carlson, and it was the incident made it into President Trump's Twitter feed.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
All right. So it was a big thing and embarrassed the city. A number of weeks go by, incidentally, and the city sort of sheepishly dropped the charges against the three when they had it pointed out by the defense attorney that what was done was completely legal. Right. Well, what we did was legal. What they did was contrary to their own order.
Right.
Well, shortly after these arrests, my son had some stickers made up because they were wondering, how do we answer this sort of overreach, this totalitarian, this oppressive behavior by the city. Mm-hmm. He wanted to answer it humorously and so forth. So he had some stickers made, Soviet Moscow, with a hammer and sickle in the center. Mm-hmm. And then for most of them it had enforced because we care. Yes. So these were red stickers, and gave it to he was giving them to businesses and to put on coffee cups and that's how it was being used. And then my two of my grandsons in the early hours of the morning went downtown and started putting stickers up downtown.
Okay.
Now, if you've ever been in a college town, you know that the light poles are sticker bulletin boards,
correct,
right?
Yes.
For whether it's yard sales, lost cats, who's playing at this bar, just all kinds of stickers. So, right. So they were putting stickers. They wound up being stopped by some cops, and this is one of the points of dispute. They were stopped by some cops, and the two boys were separated. One's 14, one's 19. They were separated, interrogated, and for the older one, Rory, out of the legal criteria for an arrest, he met 4 out of 4 of them. Okay, so he was handcuffed, put on the sidewalk, not Mirandized, and the younger grandson, whose name I'm withholding, mm-hmm. he's 14, right. He met 3 out of the 4. So they called my son, Nate, who was asleep. He came down, took them all home, and that, it appeared to be, was that. But then a week later, a cop shows up at their front door and serves them notice that they're being prosecuted. Mm-hmm. And they were prosecuted like 13 counts of Nate was prosecuted. Nate was charged with aiding and abetting stickering because he had the stickers made. And then the boys were charged with 13 counts of stickering, yes. Putting stickers. Sure. Now, each one of these misdemeanor counts can get up to 6 months in jail. Yeah. So the city was threatening these boys with 6 years in jail. 13 counts would get right. over 6 years. And they were threatening them with this because they put stickers on poles, and the ordinance. And the more you go into this, the more bizarro it gets. Yes. The ordinance that prohibits putting stickers on poles does not prohibit this kind of event. It prohibits campaign literature, vote for Murphy kind of stuff. Yes. And it prohibits commercial activity, yard site, get your washer dryer at Geronimo's, sort of thing. It prohibits those, and what the boys were doing was not prohibited by the ordinance. And the ordinance the first version of the ordinance was passed in 1950, 71 years ago, and this prosecution is the first prosecution in the history of the city under this ordinance. Yeah, isn't that amazing? Okay. Right? Yeah, what a coincidence, right? Also, in a whole chain of coincidences, the dash cams of the police cars recorded no footage. The audio recordings recorded no footage, and the body cams, if there were any there, recorded no footage. We have no footage of this event, right?
Sure.
Now,
Wow.
this is just absolutely appalling. Somebody needs to be talking to the Attorney General of Idaho and asking him to open an investigation into what the heck is going on with the city government in Moscow, because what they're doing is, Nate is my son, and these two boys are my grandsons, and they all have the last name Wilson. And what this is sort of a naked attempt to get Wilsons to lick dirt.
Mm-hmm.
Will you plead? Will you crawl? Will you acknowledge our sovereignty? Will you do this and that? Which we are refusing to do. So that's the basic outline of StickerGate. There is there's a trial coming up in June.
Okay.
In another festive moment. My youngest grandson was being tried by a juvenile judge, and during one of his hearings, 20 minutes into a Zoom hearing, they swapped judges out, and a local judge, the judge who's got the other two cases, took over the case halfway through the hearing, which is manifestly illegal, right?
Absolutely.
You can't switch judges in the middle of a trial unless a judge dies or something. You can't do that. And so there was a motion to dismiss on that basis. The city's argument was, well, yes, it was against the law, and yes, it did violate my youngest grandson's rights, but they argued it wasn't that bad.
Oh my goodness! Yes,
that was.
We're down
this whole thing is this.
Yeah, that's insane. I mean, a lot of us who have, as I've studied the law in a lot of different ways, and it's just amazing that a city government would go to the extent they are. Obviously, because of your name, and we'll touch on a lot of that as we move into the next segment. But in the next minute, so wrap up what you're talking about here. You got an existing trial that's ongoing right now for the youngest. Right. And go ahead, give us.
Well, for all of them. So they've reduced the counts for the youngest to one misdemeanor count, 6 months instead of 6 years. My older grandson Rory, they've reduced to 2 charges, and then my son, they've left at 13 charges. So they're charging them for political speech, for speech that's protesting the action of the government. Now, if they were Antifa protesters and they were trying to burn down the federal building, that would be totally understandable.
Right. Yeah. They would actually be able to get away with it, based on that type of a criteria, and
right.
That would be just an amazing thing. So just as being that couch potato type of legal person here, we're seeing that the rights are being violated all over the place, and that becomes a critical component of, wait a minute, where do we stand our ground as believers within the context of that which you've talked about, and myself as well, on how the different breakouts of government are and should be, that which is in the family, your individual family, church, and then the civil. And so what we're seeing is the civil abusing the civil alone. In the last 30 seconds here, go ahead.
Yes, these boys were protesting illegal arrests, right? So, which the city later acknowledged were illegal arrests. Right. So they were doing this. They were exercising their political right to protest an illegal arrest or a set of illegal arrests, and now they are being prosecuted for protesting the illegal arrests.
Wow. Yeah. And, we've seen that not only throughout our most recent history, but, that was something that just came about in our foundational history as well. Sam Adams really understood that truth and what that meant, and as well, the anti-federalists actually warned about it. So, folks, come on back in the next segment as we dig into some of the undergirding of this with Pastor Doug Wilson. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this second segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists got it right. And all of you folks out there, as I always do, and I'm going to keep it brief today because of our guest, is that, you know what? Go to the Liberty Works Radio Network. Take a good look at what's happening there on the live programming during the week. Check out all of the other folks that have programs on. And always, always go look for that special button, that button over there that's called Donate. This is a listener-funded program. You're the listeners, and help keep everything on the air. And with that, we're back with Pastor Doug Wilson out of Moscow, Idaho, Christ Church. We have been talking about StickerGate and getting into the details of that a little bit as we can. Everything's posted there at, as you look up over my shoulder, SamuelAdamsReturns.net. And what you have in this week's promo and on the blog has the links to all the other interesting details that Pastor Wilson has presented over time. And with that, Doug, how about where are we now? You said the cases are ongoing. We're seeing violation of rights. Has anybody at the state level, representatives, legal beagles, or whatever, been contacted to this egregious actions by the city?
Yeah, we've been making noise, and I was very pleased just a few days ago. There was a Lincoln Day dinner for the Republican Party in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and Michelle Malkin was speaking at it, and our lieutenant governor, who's actually been pretty sound and pretty good on all of the lockdown and the masks and the whole thing. Both the lieutenant governor and Michelle Malkin drew attention to this case, and we're talking about how appalling it is that this was that some teenagers were standing up for our rights and were being prosecuted for it. And so, yes, so there is some interest at the state level, and I think there really needs to be an investigation on what is an egregious abuse of power.
Oh, definitely. I mean, we're doing a lot of that. I'm working on a number of different things here in the state of Ohio relative to, again, the masking and all. In our state, they just passed legislation to start curbing the governor and the health director's powers through the legislature. So that's just an interesting event. And so we're trying to take and establish that to the extent that we can allow the townships as well as the counties to act within that whole context in addition. But when it comes to our initial rights and what's in our constitutions, both state and federal, when we see such an egregious abuse of power, that's just way too much. But that kind of segues into something that I was thinking about relative to what an impact that Christ Church has made in the city of Moscow, as well as your ministry throughout the nation. But I think what was key to me from the times that I was up there and what I observed and what I'd like you to speak about, which kind of leads to the Wilson name thing, is the way that the gospel is truly being lived out by the people in the city. Could you kind of elaborate on what's happened over the last 30 plus years that has caused people's hair to go on fire that are within the city?
Yeah. So one of the things that I emphasize in the preaching and teaching here and has taken root in our Christian community is something that I like to say over and over, which is that theology comes at your fingertips. What you believe about God and man and sin and salvation and revelation comes out your fingertips, and does not just come out your fingertips on Sunday morning when you're at church. It needs to be coming out your fingertips 24/7 all the time.
Right.
And a lot of evangelicals will say, well, yeah, you should, if you're a businessman, you should be an honest businessman Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And I would say, yes, right. You need to be honest. But that's sort of an absolute baseline. You also need to be conducting your business in a distinctively Christian way.
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
There needs to be, if you're manufacturing widgets, if you're writing books, and it's not just limited to honesty. It has to do with the glory of God. Why are we here in the first place? What is the meaning of this? How does it integrate with everything else? So we've been teaching our people to live full-orbed Christian lives, to be Christian in public, to not just have it be a private space in your head that you reserve for Jesus, but that you go out in public and you conduct yourself as a Christian in public. Now, if I'm a statesman or a politician or someone putting together a constitution, say, here's a distinctive, this is the kind of thing that I would mean about a distinctively Christian approach to making a constitution. Mm-hmm. The people who, when the Constitution was first ratified, if you read the whole thing, Bill of Rights and all, which was the Bill of Rights was added because of pressure from the anti-federalists.
Correct.
All right. The Federalists wanted the Constitution, and I think the Constitution as it stands is a decent document, but only because the anti-federalists held some people's feet to the fire and got the Bill of Rights put in there. Mm-hmm. But if you read the whole thing, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, one of the things you will see is that the framers of the Constitution had an underwriting presupposition that informed everything they did, and that presupposition was never trust an American.
True. Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Right. So this is what lies behind the balance of powers, the separation of powers. This is why we have a bicameral legislature. This is why there's a Bill of Rights. This is why it's a federal system. The states have the 10th Amendment. The states retain their powers. The people retain their powers. And the Constitution is a document of enumerated powers. The federal government only has those powers that are expressly delegated to it. Right? Now, what that means is that the framers were acutely aware of the doctrine of sin.
Yes.
The doctrine of they knew that we were not angels. Madison himself says in one of the Federalist papers that if men were angels, government would not be necessary. Right. And he said the balancing act is how do you give the government power enough to govern while at the same time requiring it to govern itself. Mm-hmm. Right. Well, that's only going to be done by pressure and force and division of powers, all the rest of it. And then one of the debates about the Bill of Rights is that they were afraid if we put the Bill of Rights in here, then people are going to think that the government gave us these rights instead of acknowledging that the government only recognizes that God gave them to us.
Right.
So our rights are God-given. Yes. But we have drifted, and we've drifted a long, long way. So most modern Americans think that, well, we have freedoms, we have our rights and freedoms, and we're so grateful to the federal government for giving us these rights and freedoms. And if we're bad little boys and girls, they might slap our hand and take those rights away. Well, this is precisely what they've attempted to do in the lockdowns and the masking orders. They've said, now we've got a crisis, and because we have this crisis, we have to take your right to free assembly away. You take your right to worship God away. Take your right to protest what the government is doing, unless you're Black Lives Matter protest, and then you can do it. Mm-hmm. It's all this nonsense. Yeah. And so, and because Christians have drifted into a radically unbiblical view of rights, which is the secular totalitarian view of rights. Mm-hmm. You only have the rights the government gives you. We need to return to a Christian way of thinking, which is we are all sinners, And God gives us rights not because we're so wonderful, but because we have to keep an eye on each other.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And so what I do too is there's two things that just to help folks that have heard me before on this is that I always say that the distinguishing factor between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists were that the Federalists always expected that the pulpits would do their jobs, and we always had a religious and a trustworthy people that would get into office and everything, where the Anti-Federalists turned around and looked and said exactly what you were saying is, no, we're pretty much rock solid sinners, and we can't always trust the pulpits to do their job. So,
Exactly.
Yeah. And then with that is that because we quit teaching even within the states, the fundamental Bill of Rights in every state, which establishes those basics, and this is what I'm reintroducing with a lot of folks here in Ohio, is that, wait a minute, go read that. First off, you have all of these unalienable rights, and it says that they're given to us by God. So where is it that we get that, exactly what you're saying, even in the context of the Christians out there, that's, wait a minute, why don't you just go read the Bill of Rights in your state constitution, let alone what it says in the federal constitution? So
the preamble of the Constitution of Idaho says we the people of Idaho, grateful to Almighty God for our freedoms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's the baseline, that's the foundation, that's the bedrock of everything. And craven Christians who want to say, well, whatever the person in charge is telling me to do, I want to do that because he says Romans 13. I'd say Romans 13 requires you to read your Constitution.
Yes.
Right?
Wait a minute. Where'd you get that interpretation from, Doug? But that's a fundamental.
Yeah, it's basic.
But, sadly, a lot of folks just don't know how to read, let alone even understanding that they have a state constitution. It's,
right.
For even a lot of Christians, that needs more dusting off. Well, I don't know. It's a toss-up between how much dusting off their Bibles might need, as well as then all of these foundational documents. So,
well, exactly. But if you ask, if I said in the Romans 13 hierarchy, no authority exists except what God has established. Who is senior in that hierarchy? Your state constitution or your governor?
Right.
Who's senior?
That's right.
In your federal system, who is senior? The U.S. Constitution or Biden? Who's senior?
Right.
And if you say, well, Biden's senior, then you're disobeying God.
Mm-hmm. Right. Exactly. And that's what we're seeing in so many different ways, is that folks have, idolized, and this is the way I look at it, is they're idolizing the concept of government, and then that which is formulated within that structure, versus looking at who gives us that original authority in what we mentioned earlier in, well, what does it mean to self-govern? People don't know how to do that. Then what does it mean in governance and family, and then the relationship of that in church, and then into civil government? So
right.
Those are things that I believe you guys teach that at Christ Church, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so even a federalist like John Adams said our Constitution presupposes a moral and a religious people.
Correct.
He said it is wholly unfit for any other. Now, and that's exactly true. If the people are immoral, if you have a nation of fornicating potheads, you cannot expect them to live in liberty. It's just not going to happen. The Constitution is going to come apart in their hands.
Yes, and we're seeing that within this administration in particular, with all that's happening. So give me a little bit, finish up here in the next 30 seconds as to what's the impact that that Christ Church has had in Moscow.
The impact that has largely been the result of Christians seeking to live like Christians in how they establish their businesses, how they educate their children. I'll point to this as the biggest single impact I think that's happened. Within the last few years, the number of government-educated kids in Moscow has dropped.
Doug,
So,
I lost you on that one, but you know what? We'll pick that up in the third segment and give you some time because somehow you dipped off the phone there. But
all right.
what's important is everything that we've been talking about. The Anti-Federalists understood what was going to happen. Sam Adams, he just nailed it as being the last Puritan, as he was named. And we look forward to having all of you back here in the third segment as we continue this conversation as Samuel Adams returns. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this third segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those Anti-Federalists, they got it right. And I want to welcome back my Screaming Eagles down there with Dr. Mike Spalding on Soaring Eagle Radio in Lima, Ohio. Sure appreciate you guys and everything you're doing. And Dr. Mike, the ministry that you have that reaches that whole area, it's a blessing to many that we mutually know. And with that, delighted to have Pastor Doug Wilson, Christ Church in Moscow, Idaho. And we're going to kind of pick up where we left off and took a dip in the bit bucket there, and couldn't hear some of that answer as far as the impact that Christ Church has had in Moscow, Idaho. And Doug, just before you jump in on that, is that my, again, observation is that when Christians live as Christians should, from what you were describing, not just in your fingertips in some X period of time, but when that is a purposeful portion of your life that is exhibited, even walking down the street or even putting stickers on poles, the whole truth of that is that it's going to have an impact that either takes and causes people to say, what's different, or I'm really bugged at those folks. So finish what you were saying again on that key impact around education and those pieces.
The key impact is this: if you want to live, all the Christians to live their lives all out for Christ, living for God fully, and like the Puritans did, that means that has to reach into education. That has to. If you want Christians to live as Christians, you have to teach Christian kids how that's to be done. And that affects their education. You can't have a secular education. And one of the tangible impacts here in Moscow's got about 22,000 people in it. And the Reformed churches here are now a significant percentage of that, a very noticeable percentage of that. And in the last few years, and this is the point I believe that cut out, in the last few years, the number of kids in our community who are being educated in the government schools has dropped below 50%.
Oh, my.
All right. In other words, private Christian education is now the majority form of education in Moscow, Idaho.
Wow. That's phenomenal.
Yeah. And this is the sort of thing that people notice.
Yeah, and so when you're looking, just, I could just see the teachers union, talk about people's hair on fire. My goodness, that would be like,
right.
Oh, well, what a direct attack on the whole form of secular education. And that would light the fires up. And then what's happening, we could go into 1,000 different things on, okay, now why are you being taxed so much if people are taking involved in private Christian education, and golly, the tax dollars are still flowing into a system that is representing less than half the student body.
Part of it, just within this last year, Logos School, which is the school I serve on the board of, has just moved to a district model. So the Logos School, K through 12, just formed the Logos School District.
Oh my!
Okay, so because we have so many kids who are. It's just exploding, and in a small town, to have a Christian school movement, and it's not just ours; it's the homeschoolers and some other Christian schools who are part of this. It's really noticeable. Now, I believe that the real grease fire is going to happen when we buy one of the government school buildings.
Oh yes, That is,
right?
yes, interesting. Yeah. And that should be feasible, with just everything that has been going on up there and the growth. And let's see, with, God's working inside of all the different families and the bodies there of the Reformed churches, Christ Church taking the lead, you have Logos, that is what, K through 12?
K through 12, right?
Okay. And then you have New St. Andrews is
New St. Andrews College, yeah.
Okay.
It's undergraduate, AA and a BA, and a few graduate degrees.
Okay. So the impact, especially, and for those that don't know, is that Moscow, Idaho is the home of the University of Idaho. So now when you're looking at the total impact of education as classical, especially classical education as it was set up and intended to be, as a direct competitor to everything that is in that other realm, if we may. So I find that interesting. So how does that then? Two things. I think when we originally talked about doing this, now that's a real impact then on the effects of the humanism that is going on, that's out there in general. And how does that fit then? I think there was a blog post that you did a while back on something on the demise, help me with that, because I think that's critical from that educational point in what's going on and how humanism has impacted both government, lives, everything else. And yet you're suggesting that there's some kind of a turn down on that.
Yeah, basically, secularism is like the prodigal son in the Lord's parable.
Okay.
When the prodigal son runs away from his father, 10 minutes after he is done so, before he gets to the first bar, before he gets to the first brothel, he has lots of money.
Right.
He got it from his father, but he still has a lot of money. And secularism that basically took the Reformation heritage, the cultural capital that had been accumulated by Christians over the centuries, and then ran away from home.
There you go.
Okay? Now, I believe that this secular experiment cannot generate the kind of societal, cultural, moral capital that the Christians can. It knows how to spend the money on booze and painted ladies, but doesn't know how to generate moral capital. Now, when I was a kid, I was born in 1953. When I was a kid, the sort of the liberal democratic establishment was pretty fat and sassy. They had moral standards. Mm-hmm. They knew which direction was up and which direction was down, but this was all their father's money.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
And we've gotten to the point where they don't even know what a boy is anymore. They don't know what a girl is anymore. They have no idea. They don't know up from down. They have been struck with genuine madness. Right? And this basically secularism, I would argue secularism is on its last legs. They can't, to use a word, I'll swipe a word from the environmentalists, this is not sustainable.
Yeah.
This cannot keep going on. There was a economist named Herbert Stein, I think it was, who came up with Stein's law, and he said anything that cannot continue on indefinitely won't.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and we're seeing that, very much so. And I think even that, though the Christian body is looking at all of that unraveling, those that are lukewarm or those that have no faith at all are looking at just from their inner sense that something's not right and that this cannot continue. And we're even seeing those, with a lot of the different groups that I work with in the political arena are sitting there shaking their heads, and we just can't keep doing this. And so that gives us the impetus to say, well, you're right. We need to repent and go before God again and, find those faith principles that aren't just principles, but have everything that we've talked about earlier of moving those fingertips, or what I like to say is get your butts out of the seat and your feet's on the streets in, the correct manner. So I think that's a very interesting perspective in saying, you know what, how do we take and move forward in this? So in the next 5 minutes, we got 5 minutes left to wrap things up. What's the next thing, Doug? What do you see?
Yeah. I've been telling people on my blog that I think what Christians need to be doing is wait for the flashpoint. I believe that we're in a room that's full of fumes, and I believe that this fundamental division that's going on, and it's gotten to the point where it's light and darkness. It's the opposition to limited government, to a Christian understanding of these things, or even a Christian understanding of anything, is stark. The battle lines are drawn. Right. This nation has not been this divided since the war between the states.
Agreed. Yeah.
All right. And there is no conceivable way that any electoral process can fix it.
True.
Okay.
Yep.
So I believe that we are looking either at reformation and revival, like a massive reformation and revival, or a civil war, or both.
Very interesting. And just real quick, Doug, where's your blog? Would you please tell folks?
Oh, sure. You can find me blogging away at dougwils.com, DOUGWILS.com. And the name of the blog is Blog and Mayblog, and I'm pretty active on there.
That you are. That's very much so, and I greatly appreciated by many. So, well, just in the last few minutes here in that wrap, is that when we look at that, there was something when Kath and I were up there visiting a number of years ago, and I asked you a question about when will we see the Spirit move on the next Great Awakening, and you commented something to the effect that, well, we don't have the leaders there. It'll be such a mess any way that it goes that the leadership in the churches, the leadership even in the civil arena, isn't prepared to handle that. Are you seeing anything moving in a positive direction that will be able to accommodate that a little bit more, or is it still a mess?
No, I'm frankly, I've been pretty encouraged over this last year. The year 2020 was a shakedown year, and I have where it sort of made people go to their corner,
yeah.
and you could see what corner they went to,
right?
And I've been pretty heartened by the reaction of a number of the ministers in my own denomination at overwhelmingly how they went to the right corner, and I was just really encouraged by that. And so I think that some of the old divisions between Christians, like whether you baptize with heads upstream or heads downstream, right. Those sorts of divisions have sort of paled in comparison between the modern "I love the devil" party. The things that they're urging are just simply diabolical.
Correct.
And nakedly so, overtly so,
right.
And this has sort of made people articulate to themselves what's actually going on, and so I think that I would say that I've been moderately encouraged over the last year at some of the leaders that have come to the front.
And I'm delighted that you said that, because there were certain things that I've seen happen as well One, which we don't have a lot, we only have 45 seconds, so I'm going to wrap us up here. But, one of the things that you had in one of your latest blogs was going through how transitions in government and all of that can happen. And you made a reference to Magdeburg, and those folks that have heard me talk about the lesser magistrates look at Magdeburg. It'll be interesting to see if there in Moscow at some point in time becomes our next Magdeburg. And, with that, we're down to the last 10 seconds. So in wrapping it, folks, Sam Adams understood the lesser magistrate. That's how he functioned. That's why we have what we have. So come on back next week. And Doug, thank you so much for being on.
Oh, you're most welcome. God bless.
You too.